a good session, so I hope you get as much out of it as possible. Just final housekeeping. Don't forget to fill out your evaluation forms. They really are useful in setting up this meeting. This is a final panel. We'll go for about an hour. I have 3 speakers who are going to open up by speaking very, very briefly. And the topic that we're going to be talking about is looking to the next 30 years. This is the 30th anniversary year of both the Orphan Drug Act as well as of NORD. And there's been a lot of commemoration of that, not only by NORD, but also by FDA itself. It's an important milestone. And so this session is going to look at the future. I'm not going to say the next 30 years, but look at the future, because things are rapidly changing, and the future will certainly be different from the past, and we'll have to adapt to it. Our speakers this morning, 2 of whom have already been on the podium. Peter Saltonstall is going to start out. Peter, President and CEO of NORD. David Shear, who is the chair of 5 companies and has started so many biotech and pharmaceutical companies in the rare disease space. And the third speaker, third but not least, but who has not been introduced, is Dr. Steven Spielberg. His resume is not in your handout, so I'll provide a little bit more background on him than I usually do on speakers. He is now the editor-in-chief of Therapeutic Innovation and Regulatory Science, which is DIA's journal. Before that, immediately before that, he was Deputy Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco at FDA. In previous incarnations, he's been Dean of Dartmouth Medical School. He's been the chair in pediatric pharmacogenomics and director of the Center for Personalized Medicine and Therapeutic Innovation at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. He was principal investigator for the Institute for Pediatric Innovation. He trained as a pediatrician, but has spent all of his life in academic or administrative medicine as well as in practicing pediatrics. So thank you, Dr. Spielberg. He's a little bit of a last-minute fill-in for some of the folks from FDA who could not be here. So thank you for being here. With that, let me turn the microphone, or you have your own microphone, to Peter Saltonstall.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you all, and thank you all for staying for this last session. Thinking about 30 years out for me is a challenge because of where we are and the challenges that face us every day as the head of a patient organization. So I'm going to reflect a little bit on breaking down my 30 years in a couple of different ways. One, what it means to NORD and as a patient organization, and then also take sort of a step back and look at where I think the marketplace is going. And if I only get out 3 or 4 years, please pardon that. But that's, I think, as far as I actually can start to see. From the patient organization perspective, I think for NORD, it's going to be really important to continue to be the voice of patients of rare diseases in this country and to help continue to organize those groups. I mean, we have 7,000 or 7,300 rare diseases, the number I hear varies back and forth at NIH. And we only have a few hundred therapies for those groups, so I think the importance of helping to identify and build patient organizations so that there is a loud voice in the rare disease space is a very important function and role that NORD plays in the community. Excuse me. So we will continue to be tenacious about identifying those groups that are already in place and helping work with them, and then identifying and incubating any one individual that may have a rare disease that hasn't been diagnosed that needs help them formulate, put together a strategy, connect, and build their patient organization. So I see NORD as a vehicle for doing that, and that with the identification of the work that's going on with the genome now, we see things becoming more and more rare, so I think there are going to be more and more groups, and there needs to be an organization similar to ours to help pull those groups together. The more names, I always say, that we have on the left-hand side of the station area gives us more leverage in Washington to think about policy issues and so on, and how we get drugs approved, how we provide incentives to make sure that industry sees it as a viable way of, or a viable business model. So NORD plays an interesting role in all of those areas, and I see ourselves being the leader in that space, and being what I call the destination, if you will. We're hoping that clinicians, patients, researchers, anybody that needs help, wants to know something about rare diseases can come to NORD, where we will act as the hub to help turf them to the appropriate place. We clearly don't see ourselves as having all of the knowledge, but we see ourselves much like a Google, the place that you come to and it sends you to the other places. So I think for NORD, we're going to continue on the same path we've been on for the last 30 years, and hopefully as more diseases are discovered or uncovered, I will say, we will be able to help build the organizational structure around that, help the patients that are involved with that, help them find the cure and connect with one another. So from a NORD perspective, that's where I see us going. I think that the larger challenge for us right now as patients is, over the next couple of years, the implementation, I will have to say, of the Affordable Care Act, and what that's going to mean to patients, what that's going to mean to access to therapies, specifically with us now starting to look more like the European Union, and with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act and a lot of the decisions being moved to the states. I see us now, I was talking to my counterpart, Jan McComb, who was here yesterday, and he actually joked with me that of all the member states they have, that they're going to look small compared to the United States now, having to now deal with each state and the payer system in each state, and it really does mirror what's going on in, excuse me, in Europe. And so we see that as a continuing challenge right now, as with the economic conditions that we have in this country, with some states that we're speaking with and working with right now, having more capacity to support the cost of drugs and what goes into the formularies, if you will. We see rare disease drugs, which have historically been slightly more expensive than other drugs, states trying to tighten their belts. We see it as a large challenge for our audience moving forward. And so I think a NORD can play a very active role in helping to build patient organizations, build the infrastructure, and build the grassroots organizations, so there are people in those areas that can address those issues, work with the various partners in the space, payers in the space, and so on, to ensure that access is there for patients across the board. And so we see ourselves now at NORD in these next few years basically working through what the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is really going to look like. And I think some of us, I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you. I don't know right now how well it's going to work. I just know that it's here and that we need to live with the rules and that we're going to try to implement it as best we can. So I see that as being an enormous challenge for us right now. I also think that it's, again, as I said earlier, it's going to be really important to make sure that the pathways for industry are clear, are doable. And when I say doable, are doable on all sides, if you will. NORD has not been as close to industry as it is now, I would have to say, because my predecessor just really wasn't there as much as I'm there, and I recognize that industry develops therapies for our patients, and so we need to work together on all aspects of bringing new therapies to the market. And so it's a major charge for us to make sure that we make the Affordable Care Act work, make sure that innovation and access is there and available, that companies want to be in the space and develop products for small markets. And I think NORD can play a significant role in all of those areas to help continue to move things forward for patients, if you will. And I think, Wayne, that's it.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for remaining here. So at least we have an audience for this last panel, which I hope we can make optimistic and upbeat, because entrepreneurs like myself, really, we couldn't function unless we had a fundamentally optimistic viewpoint point. So when Wayne asked me to be on this panel, and he said that the job was to look 30 years in the future, I guess I took on the assignment, but clearly it's, you know, not one of those things that's so easy to do. We can't even figure out what's going to happen in the next few days in Washington, to put it mildly. But I thought what I would do is I would try to utilize this opportunity to sort of talk about what it takes to innovate and actually go back 30 years. This is a little bit of a strange, I'm playing tricks on Wayne here. So I want to start by going back 30 years ago and share with you an experience that I had. I was working with a fund that was investing in technology and life sciences. And we wanted to have like a think tank session one day that was going to do exactly what Wayne wanted to do for this panel, and that is, what does the future look like? And that was back in the 1980s. I guess I'm dating myself. So among the people that we invited, we actually had a Nobel Prize winner in the life sciences, but we had someone coming from technology. His name is George Heilmeyer. George had been at one point head of DARPA. George had been involved in running the Star Wars program. He had run stealth bomber development. And so George gets up and says, well, the future, one of the most important developments in the future will be the development of the information superhighway. And I will tell you that no one in the room really knew what he was talking about. And everyone was scratching our heads and saying, well, you know, what is this? And by the end of it, we probably still didn't fully understand what it is. Of course, everyone today in this audience is, checking their emails and very frequently doing their web surfing. And one other little anecdote before we get onto the target here in terms of the topic, but and there is actually some method in the madness. I worked with a guy years ago who was the chief technology officer at Ford and Xerox. And actually, when he was at Xerox, he was Jack Goldman. When he was at Xerox, he organized the Palo Alto Research Park, and really that was really the innovation incubator for Xerox at the time, and they had really developed some of the most important elements of what became the personal computer. And so Jack went to his board and said, every desk is going to have a personal computer on its available for use, and the Xerox board said, well, forget it, you're crazy, Jack, go back to your lab somewhere. And of course, Xerox really lost the race to a lot of companies. And there are a lot of these examples, but so what's my point here? My point is that there are visionaries. There were some visionaries historically, going back many years, that really were able to create disruptive, transformative change in fields. In the area of life sciences, I'll give you another example, which is basically a guy that decided one day to invest in technology to sequence the human genome. His name was, he's passed away, Wally Steinberg, venture capitalist par excellence, that built a number of companies. He partnered up with Craig Venter to really, in a sense, become the engine that enabled the sequencing of the human genome. People thought he was crazy. I mean, what was he doing? Why would you want? Because people thought that much of the genome was probably really, in a sense, useless. So a lot of these examples of visionaries and innovators. And the reason that I bring this up as part of my talk is that the future for rare diseases really will require people like that who are willing to and capable of essentially taking a position on what it's going to take to tackle problems in the future that really are very important. We've had people that have done it already. I think that the life sciences, the pharmaceutical companies, they've had some successes, and certainly the representative of Genzyme here today. And I think there's a lot of pride. There should be some pride in the fact that Genzyme really was a principal innovator in this field. Really set the path for many, including my own, Geran, which I chair, that developed a drug in 2012 for HoFH. So we need more innovators. Now, the other thing that we need, and I think it's going to be an important part of the future, will be the people in this room, and frankly, everyone else that attended this conference. And that's why I really enjoy coming here. This is not the typical life science venture capital business conference. And the reason that I enjoy coming here is because I think it's important. The importance is that patient advocates and patients are really the driving force in making things happen that are hard. And you know, as we talk about affordable care, and we talk about the regulatory challenges, and we talk about even the challenges that are intrinsic in discovering and developing drugs, it is the patient that the best of people in rare diseases, perhaps more broadly in industry, should be focused on and should be sort of working with and collaborating with this, you know, topic that was discussed earlier today, sort of this, the need, the imperative to collaborate. Absolutely essential. And I will say that just in terms of a, you know, personal anecdote, I do spend time now, not necessarily in my day job, but really getting to work with the company, with people and some of the patient advocacy groups in the rare disease field. And I learn a lot from it. I learn a lot about their passion. I think that each of these groups have tremendously talented people that are really focused on what is needed for the future. And there are examples where they do things like provide funding to research for which there are real gaps where no one else is going to do it. There are people who are tirelessly, passionately connecting, you know, to different components of you know, what one might say is an ecosystem or supply chain, and doing it all in a way that really is addressing, you know, the patients, maybe in their families or maybe it's themselves. So I think the future, for me at least, is, you know, this collaborative, perhaps even what one calls the pre-competitive organizations and consortia, which can, you know, utilize some of the principles that we've heard in the earlier session, having academics and industry people working together with, you know, with FDA and with actually individuals from a variety of walks of life who really can help to define paths forward. I think what's exciting, and maybe getting further into why I'm excited about the rare disease field, it is absolutely true that it is a place where you can move mountains. It's absolutely true where there are ways in which you can have pristine biological pathways and principles that can be operated upon. This is a place where we are attracting, back to this whole issue of the visionaries and innovators. There's an extraordinary array of such people who are being attracted to the rare disease field. I am really impressed by that. And they're not only bringing their energies, they're bringing their technologies. And then there are people, we had in our panel on Monday, the venture capitalists. I mean, this is becoming a hotbed for investment, for all the reasons that many people have talked about in this conference. But it's those talents, it's those resources that are being put to work now. And where the success has been emerging, it's driving more people to be attracted to this field. And I think as we look out 30 years from now, what are the components of success that we need? We need all of those people coupled with really, in essence, emergent technologies that can be brought to bear quickly and effectively. We've heard a lot about things like gene therapy. You know, we have various other approaches where we can really modulate gene expression. We have antisense, we have exon skipping technologies, we have all of these things that really are now becoming parts of a toolbox that the VCs, coupled with academic researchers, coupled with patient advocacy groups, really can and will continue to work very, very closely together in the future. And that's the reason that I feel very optimistic. What are the challenges? Well, I think that one of the major challenges, which have really been discussed quite a lot during this conference, is whether the model, the business model, and in a sense the engine that has driven innovation over the past, call it 20 or 30 years, from the time that Genzyme had done its initial work in this field, whether that will be sustainable. And with, I mean, as Peter's pointing out, I mean, what do we really know about what the future will be regarding reimbursement as one part of it? I have a fundamental belief that the patient advocacy groups will be the most potent resource. I hate to use the term weapon, but the most potent resource to offset what could be adverse, deleterious, policy-oriented moves that would rob the opportunities for rare disease patients and families for getting their treatments and cures. And that's why I've chosen, for some of the work that I do, to really get to know NORD, get to know the patient advocacy groups, specifically the ones that I've aligned with, and work with them to ensure that the future over the next 30 years can be very, very productive with respect to innovation. And I'll end by saying that for us, the most important and the most gratifying thing is when we have that opportunity. It's a rare opportunity to get a drug over the goal line, as we did this past December. And we have patients and patient groups coming to us and saying, not only thanking us, hugging us, and encouraging us. And that's really more powerful in many ways than even currency. So I'm not sure that I addressed specifically what Wayne wanted, but I just wanted to say that I think it's a great opportunity for the next 30 years to continue and expand and hopefully be successful for patients and their families in this field.
Well, I've been a physician for 40 years, so I can out-trump, just by dint of age, some of my colleagues here. And I wanted to put the whole field into context. And I want to look at three things specifically. The rate of accrual of new knowledge and change in science. What that means for expectations of outcomes of new therapeutics. And what in turn all of that means for patient advocacy. And how I think organizations like NORD and each of the organizations that you're involved in can play really pivotal roles in the future of medicine and of healthcare. And this comes with perspective of my having spent probably 2/3 of my career in academic medicine, 1/3 of my career in the pharmaceutical industry, and the rest at FDA. So the three trends I want to look at again: rate of change in new knowledge, expectations, and patient advocacy. Rate of change. Biomedical science is now outstripping Moore's law, the doubling time of computer speed. And you've gotten a feel for this, and all of you in each of your different areas has a sense of the impact of genomics. Our ability to look at whole genome scans, the change in technology to look at gene sequences and to understand the correlation of genotype and phenotype. Phenotype being what we actually look like as individual patients. And a couple of things that I want to highlight that have direct impact on the issue of patient organizations, names of patient organizations, and how we do business as patient advocates. For those of you who have not read the National Academy of Sciences document termed Towards Precision Medicine, a new classification of disease, published in November 2011, all of you should. It's on the National Academy of Sciences website. And it looks into the change in the way in which we understand conditions, health and disease, resilience and susceptibility. And the bottom line is that conditions that traditionally we thought were the same are often caused by very different things, and conditions that look very different are often share etiologies, share causes. For me, having been taught medicine mostly by names of the discoverer, old German or British scientists who named conditions, that's gone away. But remembering that I thought of cystic fibrosis when I was a medical student as mucoviscidosis, and we changed the name to cystic fibrosis and thought we were so smart because we had a better name that still had nothing to do with the cause. For all of us, it means that advocacy groups for, quote, disease X Disease X really is not likely to be a homogeneous disease. It's likely to be a collection of different kinds of causes leading to a final common phenotype. And thus, advocacy for one narrow aspect without discussing with other organizations that are working on things that might look very different is not where the future lies. And putting in a plug for NORD, it lies in all of us thinking together about the things that we now call diseases that likely is going to be very, very different. And it's already happening right now. I'm always blown away when a new drug developed, for example, for small cell carcinoma of the lung against a target that we think of as small cell carcinoma of the lung may be applicable to a third of children with neuroblastoma. Totally different disease, but driven by similar loci. And therefore, we need to think about how to borrow knowledge from an area way outside and bring it in to those areas that are relevant to us. Expectations. We've heard a lot about cystic fibrosis, and we've heard a lot about the new drug for the G551D mutation. It is a miracle. So much of a miracle, in fact, that our older son decided during his pediatric residency to go into pulmonary medicine because of seeing patients receive this medicine and get better. But it doesn't get better than that. And it gets better in part because of what you've heard about the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, the advocacy for understanding the cause of the disease at a basic level, and understanding the different mutations, the advocacy for setting up an investigative network, if you will, research ready so that when the big breakthrough came, you didn't have to go out and genotype the patients. You didn't have to go out and define the clinical outcomes of relevance. That had already been done. The investigators were all ready to work together, and the patients were ready to participate in clinical trials internationally. So when the compound came along, having genotyped all the patients with CF, that 4% with the G551D mutation could be selectively entered into clinical trials with a biomarker that reflected the pathophysiology of the disease, the sweat test. You saw the reversal of the sweat test in vivo by this medicine. Now, quickly into clinical trials, 160 patients in the pivotal clinical trial. 6 years from IND to approval, 3-month review time within the FDA. And my colleagues at the FDA who did the review said something I've never heard before. The science was so good that the review was fun. That's what it's about. Fun in being able to benefit our fellow human beings and to move something forward at a speed that could never have been possible without that delicious science. However, most diseases do not work simply that way. And there was a big question, even though you reverse the pathophysiology of the sweat test, would reversing and improving chloride conductance in membranes in fact be able to benefit the patients for clinically meaningful outcomes to those patients? That's what therapeutics is about, folks. It's not about changing a marker. It's about improving the lives of patients with a given condition in a clinically meaningful way to those patients. Advocacy? Yeah, terribly important. And understanding what matters to patients, terribly important. But most diseases do not work that way. Many diseases that I've cared for over the years, even Mendelian inherited diseases, so much damage is done to organs in utero that you can't reverse that damage. Different than cystic fibrosis. But that doesn't mean you can't improve the lives of the patients born with those conditions. But it does change expectations of outcomes, and again, involving patients and understanding the expectations of those outcomes becomes absolutely critical. Even for something like BRCA1, which everybody glibly says now that Angelina Jolie has announced her mastectomies, is associated with 80% risk of breast cancer, lifetime risk in women, absolutely true, but also 20% never develop that phenotype. And we're recognizing now that there are multiple modifier genes that take risk from well under 50% to 100%. It's not just one gene, it's multiple genes interacting together and environmental variables. And for most diseases, it's going to be more complex than even cystic fibrosis and the G551D story. Our expectations need to be modified by our humility in the face of the complexity of human biology, which doesn't mean we are not going to make huge advances. That's the state of the art today. With relative primitive sequencing of the genome, we are going to get better and better and better and understand all those modifiers. But we need to understand that different things will be improved along the way. Cystic fibrosis, my entire career as a pediatrician, I've seen survival going from 11 years to more than 40 by working at the different aspects of that phenotype, everything from pulmonary infections through nutrition issues and being able to replace pancreatic enzymes. That allowed patients to live long enough, if you will, for the big one, for Kalydeco, and hopefully more compounds to be developed in the future. But it is not simple, and we should not expect that each compound is going to revolutionize people's lives, but they may help improve lives. To wit, the involvement of patients in the design of clinical trials. FDA has invited patients increasingly, and companies have invited patients increasingly to share what is a clinically meaningful outcome, and outcomes may well vary in terms of their meaning to different patients. I will refer you to 2 papers happily published in the new journal that I'm editing right now that'll be out in November, describing FDA's involvement with patients on central nervous system diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and multiple sclerosis. Looking not just at single outcomes, because these diseases do not have single outcomes. They have impacts on mobility and tasks of daily living and movement. They have cognitive effects, and they have effects on behavior and psychiatric state of patients. Importantly, different drugs currently being developed will impact different spheres in different patients, and the meaning of illness to different patients may well lead them to select first a drug that impacts movement because that's their most important symptom, or it may be on the psychiatric side that will help them to be able to cope better with their disease and live with their families in a more satisfying way for a longer period of time. It varies from different patients, and advocacy groups, patients and families have helped to better frame an understanding of CNS disease so that the FDA can begin to work together with industry to develop validated, consistent endpoints that can be used in clinical trials to speed the clinical trials and make those clinical trials more clinically meaningful. So when you write a label, physicians taking care of patients and those patients have language in the label that means something to them, not correction of a biomarker, very distant from their primary real concerns. A final point about patient advocacy. Already recognize you're going to have to work with other advocacy groups because diseases are going to change and their names are going to change. 2, our expectations need to be modified by the plethora of complexity of human biology, and we need to be able to work together with FDA. You need to work together with the medical profession. An awful lot of my colleagues are really depressed at the moment, partly by healthcare financing and everything. I did not go into pediatrics to be rich. Pediatrics is the bottom of the economic heap. I went into it because I loved working with children and families, which was a real surprise to me as an only child. But it worked out. The more advocacy groups work together with those who care for their patients, and the more doctors are directly involved, the better. The clinical trial network established through Cystic Fibrosis Foundation includes the doctors who do the research, but those are the doctors who take care of the patients. And one of the reasons that FDA was willing to approve a drug with barely 200 human exposures is all those patients will continue to be followed by those same doctors so that long-term outcomes will be cataloged. Long-term outcomes will be captured and made viable, which means you can approve a drug with fewer pre-approval exposures. That speeds the process. It makes the process of approval more confident on the part of a regulator. And the final issue, critical for advocacy groups, is we don't approve drugs only on the basis of efficacy and effectiveness. All compounds and life itself is associated with risk. And the agency and regulatory agencies around the world and manufacturers need to understand patients' willingness to accept risk for whatever benefit may be accrued from a medicine. The issue of AIDS was brought up in the last discussion. When AIDS was a uniformly fatal disease, and when I was first seeing children with AIDS in 1981, all of whom were dying within months of diagnosis, what do you think the tolerance for risk was? And the advocacy community said to us all, we will accept risk because we are all dying, and there is no alternative. And we undertook remarkable studies, including the vertical transmission study from moms to babes, that everybody said, oh, but there's so much risk. And it was the only miracle of the early AIDS epidemic, preventing vertical transmission to babies. It was a remarkable outcome. And we all learned together, manufacturers, agencies, and advocacy groups, that you could accept a higher degree of risk given the severity of the disease. What do you think advocates are now talking about? Fewer medicines, so I don't have to take 80 pills a day. More efficacy, fewer side effects, more subtlety. Not willing to accept as much risk because we've now converted it to more or less a chronic illness. So in advocating and in discussing things, both with sponsors and with regulators, because what do you think slows up regulators? It's fear of risk, okay? We, as a society, need to begin a new dialogue, and I would argue that the FDA certainly has already initiated that dialogue on the acceptance of risk tolerance, given the condition and given the drug. So, advice for the regulatory community, for the advocacy community, talk to each other. Diseases are going to change. Your disease is likely to change and not have the same name in 5 years. And it may be aligned with a disease that you can't even imagine, and you better have those dialogues early. NORD, and great umbrella to bring people together. Expectations need to be realistic based on the target and the association of the target with the phenotype, with the disease. And yes, regulators are willing to talk with patient groups now. And one of the key roles is not only defining the disease and what the expectations are, defining endpoints together, clinically meaningful endpoints, but to develop a new dialogue on risk-benefit, or as I prefer, benefit-risk. We don't develop drugs for risk and they happen to have benefit. We develop interventions for benefit, but all interventions do carry risk. We need to have that dialogue together, improving the confidence of sponsors to go forward, and improving the confidence of regulators.